A poor girl says to the billionaire CEO, "Hi, sir, why is my mother's picture in your wallet?" Before the story begins, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The autumn air was crisp as the first rain of the season began to fall, tapping against the windows of the Willow Cafe. Inside, the atmosphere was warm, the scent of freshly brewed coffee blending with the faint aroma of baked pastries. At 16, Lila Mitchell had already become an expert at moving swiftly between tables, balancing trays of coffee and muffins without a single spill. Her young face, framed by chestnut hair, held a quiet determination, one that didn't fit the image of most teenagers her age. Lila didn't have time for childish distractions, not with her mother's health hanging over them like a storm cloud, threatening to drown them both in its shadow. Her mother, a once vibrant woman, now fought tirelessly against cancer that had taken too much. Her energy, her joy, her spirit. And yet, Lila watched her mother hold on to life with every ounce of strength she had, refusing to admit how tired she truly was. The weight of the hospital bills, the mounting debt from treatments that seemed to do nothing but drain their bank account, pressed heavily on Lila's shoulders. She wasn't just a teenager anymore. In many ways, she had become the adult in their house. Her mornings began early, her nights stretched long. After school, she would head straight to the cafe where she worked, clocking in for the evening rush, taking orders with practiced ease, and always making sure her mother had what she needed at home. She rarely allowed herself a break, not when every penny she earned was vital to their survival. Her schoolwork suffered, but it was something she couldn't afford to care about. The weight of her mother's illness and the fear of losing her were constant companions, always tugging at the edges of her thoughts. But there was no time for worry, no space for weakness. She had learned that if she let herself feel too deeply, the weight of it would crush her. So she pushed those emotions down, locking them away in a deep place where no one could see. The cafe was her safe space, a world that felt simple in comparison to the one she faced at home. It was a small, cozy place where regulars like Mr. Johnson, the grumpy retiree who always ordered the same cup of black coffee, and Marge, the talkative older woman who worked behind the counter, gave Lila the semblance of normalcy. In their little corner of the world, it was easy to forget the battles raging outside, battles Lila had no choice but to fight. Despite the weight of her responsibilities, Lila had learned to find small joys in her routine. The way the cafe's wooden floors creaked underfoot, the gentle hum of quiet conversation, and the soft clinking of cutlery all created a soothing rhythm. These moments, fleeting as they were, offered her a reprieve from the constant pressure of caring for her mother. But even here, in this safe haven, there was always the undercurrent of worry. The hospital appointments that came with an unrelenting frequency, the uncertainty of whether this treatment or that would finally give her mother a chance at life. And yet, Lila couldn't afford to let fear control her. She had watched her mother struggle for too long to allow herself to fall apart now. Her mother, Catherine, was everything to her. Lila had spent her life listening to her mother's soft laughter, watching her brush away tears that Lila never saw. But in the last few years, her mother's laughter had become less frequent, her smile more fragile. The hospital bills, the pain that never seemed to end, had slowly worn her down, leaving Lila with the painful knowledge that no matter how hard she worked, there would always be something else, something new to worry about. This day, like so many others, began with the familiar rush of orders. Lila stood at the counter wiping down a newly vacated table, her mind already on the next task. She barely noticed the bell above the door chime, the entry of yet another customer, another anonymous face in the sea of regulars. The sound of a deep voice caught her attention as it rose above the soft murmur of the cafe. "I'll have my usual," the man said, his tone smooth, almost commanding. Lila turned her head, catching sight of him for the first time. He was tall, well-dressed, in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit that seemed entirely out of place in the cozy, worn-in cafe. The man, Mr. Blackwood, was someone she had seen in the papers, his face splashed across business headlines, but never in person. The CEO of Blackwood Enterprises. His name carried weight, and Lila felt an instinctive pull to step back, to give him the space that someone like him deserved. She had seen men like him on TV, men whose power seemed as palpable as the air around them. Yet despite his polished exterior, there was something about him that felt different. His eyes, though dark and distant, held a certain weight. Lila couldn't quite place it, but something about him felt familiar, though she couldn't imagine why. Her focus shifted back to the task at hand. She delivered a coffee to a table of regulars, trying to keep her composure, trying not to let the tension of his presence affect her. But there was no ignoring him. No matter how much she tried to push the thought away, she couldn't help but wonder what a man like him was doing here, in a small, almost forgotten cafe, instead of in one of the sleek high-rises that dotted the downtown skyline. Her thoughts spiraled as she returned to the counter to wipe down the last few mugs. It wasn't until Marge's voice, unusually formal, snapped her out of her reverie. "Mr. Blackwood, what a surprise to see you in person, sir," Marge said, her words carrying an unexpected weight. Lila glanced up, feeling her heart race as she met the billionaire's gaze for the first time. As their eyes locked, she felt an almost magnetic pull. The energy in the room shifted, the hum of the cafe becoming muffled as his presence seemed to demand attention. Lila hadn't expected a man like him to walk into her world, her small, humble cafe. But there he was, and in that moment, everything in her life felt like it had shifted ever so slightly, as if the universe itself was about to rewrite the story she had always known. Little did she know, this encounter, this moment, was just the beginning of a journey that would unravel everything she thought she knew about her past and about herself. It had been one of those mornings that started like any other. Gray clouds blanketing the sky, the soft tapping of rain offering a quiet lullaby against the windows of the Willow Cafe. Lila Mitchell moved through the cozy cafe like a whisper, her tray balanced with the expertise of someone who had done this dance 1,000 times before, though she'd only been working here 6 months. 6 long, weary months, where the corners of her smile had become frayed and her shoulders bore more weight than any 16-year-old should carry. But necessity had turned her into something more than a teenager. She was her mother's caretaker, her family's only hope. With her chestnut hair tied back and her uniform apron cinched tightly around her waist, Lila had mastered the rhythm of the cafe, from the clatter of mugs to the clink of coins in the tip jar, all while her mind quietly calculated how much closer today's shift would get her to paying off another sliver of her mother's growing medical debt. It was routine, it was life, and it was survivable, until the moment the front door chimed and everything changed. At first, she didn't look up. There were too many cups waiting on the counter, too many customers needing refills. But the air shifted. The sound of Marge's voice, normally casual, sometimes laced with jokes or complaints, became suddenly stiff, almost reverent. "Mr. Blackwood, what a surprise to see you in person, sir." That name, it rang like a distant bell in Lila's ears. Her hands paused mid-wipe on the counter. Slowly, carefully, she turned toward the entrance. And there he stood, casting a tall silhouette against the gray light filtering through the rain-slicked glass door. Alexander Blackwood. The name didn't just carry weight, it was a symbol in this town. He was the man whose empire towered over the city skyline, whose face appeared on business magazines, who wielded fortunes with the ease of someone flicking dust off their cuff. No one expected to see him here, in a modest cafe nestled between laundromats and bookstores, let alone without an entourage. Lila's breath caught in her throat. His presence didn't simply command attention, it demanded it. Tall, with salt and pepper hair slicked back neatly, dressed in a charcoal suit tailored so perfectly it looked painted on, he removed his sunglasses with a slow precision that seemed more theatrical than practical. He looked out of place, a relic from another world. But there was something else, a heaviness in his eyes, a weariness tucked beneath the sharp lines of his jaw. He didn't look at anyone in particular, yet everyone in the cafe seemed to shrink just a little in his presence. "Miss Reynolds is out sick today," he said in a deep, controlled voice. "Thought I'd come fetch my own coffee for once." Lila moved quietly back behind the counter, not wanting to draw attention, but her hands trembled slightly. Not out of fear, something else. Something she couldn't name yet. She kept her head down as Marge prepared the usual order. Black coffee, no sugar, no cream. Efficient, uncomplicated, just like the man himself. She could feel him standing nearby, feel the tension ripple through the room like a string pulled tight. Her eyes flicked up just once, and in that second, he looked her way. Their eyes met, and Lila felt her breath leave her chest like it had been punched out. There was nothing kind or cruel in his expression, just a strange intensity, a flicker of recognition, almost though impossible. Why would a man like him recognize someone like her? She turned quickly and returned to bussing the tables, needing something, anything to occupy her hands. But as fate would have it, he moved toward the far corner to wait, and when he reached into his inner jacket pocket to pull out his wallet, something slipped. It landed on the wooden floor with a soft flutter, barely making a sound. Lila, nearest to him, instinctively bent down to help. Business cards scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. She gathered them in silence until her fingers brushed something different. A small photograph, worn at the edges from years of being handled, loved, perhaps even mourned. She picked it up, intending to pass it over without a second glance, and then she looked. The breath she'd only just found moments ago vanished again. It was a picture of a woman, young, vibrant, smiling slightly, as if she didn't know someone was capturing her in that instant. Her hair, Lila's hair, her smile, Lila's smile, the shape of her cheekbones, the softness in her gaze. It was unmistakable. It was her mother. Lila stared at it, her fingers suddenly cold, her vision blurred around the edges. Her heart pounded in her chest like a frantic knock at a locked door. She lifted her eyes to the man who now stood frozen above her, his gaze not on the business cards, but on her, on the photo in her trembling hands. "Sir," she said, her voice breaking under the weight of the impossible. Why, why is my mother's picture in your wallet?" The silence that followed was the kind that hangs heavy, dense with things unsaid. The cafe seemed to vanish around them. Marge stopped mid-motion, conversations halted. Even the rain outside seemed to hush, as if the universe itself were leaning in to listen. Alexander Blackwood went pale, not the pale of confusion or embarrassment, but the pale of a man being haunted by a ghost he'd never laid to rest. His eyes moved from the photo to Lila's face, back and forth, and the truth cracked the composure he wore like armor. "That's Catherine Mitchell," he said finally, as though speaking her name out loud pulled the air from his lungs. She's your mother?" Lila could barely nod. "She never mentioned knowing you." He swallowed hard. "It was a long time ago." The room began to spin. Lila's knees felt weak beneath her, the photo shaking in her hand like a leaf caught in the wind. "I think we should talk," Alexander said gently, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "Privately." "I'm working," Lila whispered, though the words felt absurd. Mr. Jenkins emerged from the back room, eyes wide, having clearly heard enough to understand this moment transcended work shifts and muffin deliveries. "Take your break, Lila," he said. "Take as long as you need." Still dazed, she led this man, into the private dining room in the back, the photograph now heavy as stone in her pocket. As they sat down across from each other, a storm swirled within her. She had grown up in the absence of a father, always told the same thing: he wasn't in the picture. And now here was a man who quite literally had her mother's picture in his wallet. A man with wealth, power, and a look in his eyes that bordered on something terrifyingly close to regret. He told her everything: of Catherine, of college, of love, of a cruel, controlling father who had forced them apart under the threat of collapse, his life, his inheritance, his company. How Alexander, at 22, had made a choice that haunted him every single day. And how, despite that, he had carried that photo in his wallet ever since. Not for closure, but because it was the only piece of his life that had ever felt real. Lila sat in silence, struggling to breathe around the knot in her chest. Her world was unraveling thread by thread, and yet it felt like something deeper was being stitched together at the same time. Then came the question. "When exactly did you and my mother part ways?" she asked. 17 years ago, December." Lila blinked. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm 16. Alexander stared at her, everything in him falling still. She could see the truth hitting him like a tidal wave. "She never told me," he said, hoarse, broken. I, I didn't know." In that moment, the billionaire became something else. A man who had lost something he never even knew he had. A man who had missed first steps, Birthdays, lullabies, scraped knees, and school plays. A man who had carried a photograph for nearly 2 decades while the living, breathing reminder of that love had been growing up just a few streets away, waiting, wondering. "I need to see her," he said. "Your mother, is she?" "She's in the hospital," Lila said quietly, guilt rising like a tide. "Lymphoma, the treatment's not working. We can't afford the next round. That's why I'm here, working." That's why. Alexander closed his eyes for a moment, grief tightening every line of his face. When he opened them again, there was steel in his gaze. "She's going to the Mayfield Clinic," and he said, "I'll make the arrangements. I'll pay for everything." Lila pulled back, unsure. "You can't just jump in. We don't even know if you're—" "I know," he said, voice steady now. "But if there's even a chance that I'm your father, that I still have a chance to help, I'm not going to waste it." Tears stung Lila's eyes. For 16 years, she had lived in the absence of this moment, in the silence of not knowing, and now the silence had been broken. But at what cost? As she watched him rise to leave, handing her a business card with his private number scrawled on the back, her hand still trembled. Not from fear, from something else. Hope. The kind of hope that could heal or hurt. The kind that calls you back to the story because there's more to tell. A mother with secrets. A father with regrets. A daughter caught between what was and what could be. And just beyond the rain-streaked windows of the cafe, the future waited, uncertain but no longer silent. And to the listener, dear friend, don't stop here. Because the heart of this story has only just begun to beat. What happens when Catherine sees the man she loved walk back into her hospital room? What will she say? What truths will come to light in the face of illness, love, and time lost? Stay with me. Let's walk the rest of the road together. The private dining room of the Willow Cafe was quiet now, save for the steady drumming of the rain against the windows. Lila Mitchell sat across from the man who had turned her world upside down in the span of a single morning. The business card bearing the name Alexander Blackwood lay between them like a silent witness to the truth neither of them had expected to face today. Her heart pounded in her chest, a tangle of anger, disbelief, and something she didn't dare name. The photo of her mother, Catherine, young and smiling, now rested in her pocket like a stone, heavy and impossible to ignore. She watched Alexander closely, searching for any sign of deceit in his face. But he didn't wear the mask of a billionaire here. He looked human, humbled, as if carrying the weight of a past he had never truly left behind. "I knew your mother," he began slowly, his deep voice now quiet and thick with emotion. "At university, we were very close." Lila's eyes narrowed, unsure what to feel. "Close?" she echoed. "What does that mean? Were you in love?" Alexander exhaled, a sound that seemed to carry the burden of 17 years. "Yes, I was in love with her. She was—" He stopped, closing his eyes briefly. "The brightest light in my life. Catherine was brilliant, kind, stubborn, infuriating sometimes, but unforgettable. I was studying business, she was pre-med. We met in a shared ethics course." A wistful smile touched his lips. "She challenged everything I thought I knew. We were inseparable for almost 3 years." Lila sat in stunned silence. Her mother had never said a word. Not one. No stories of college romance. No tearful confessions. Just a clean, sharp line drawn between the past and present. She'd always assumed it was because of pain. But this was deeper. "So what happened?" Lila asked, though she already sensed the answer would be heavy. "Why did you leave her?" Alexander looked down at his hands, his expensive watch glinting under the pendant lamp. "My father happened." Lila tilted her head. "What do you mean?" He met her gaze then, and the sorrow in his eyes hit her like a wave. "My family name, Blackwood, it meant everything to him. Legacy, control, appearances. He didn't care about who I loved. He cared about who I was seen with, who I was expected to marry. Catherine didn't fit into his idea of our future. She was from a working-class family, a scholarship student, independent, strong." His voice cracked slightly. He hated that. Lila frowned. "So he told you to end it?" "No," Alexander said bitterly. "He forced me to. My father didn't just ask. He made it a condition of everything I had been raised to inherit. If I didn't break things off with Catherine, he'd destroy everything." Our company was already in trouble. Thousands of employees, families who depended on us. He threatened to sell it all, liquidate. People would lose their homes, their retirement, their lives. And you let him? Lila asked, her voice sharper than she intended. Alexander didn't flinch. I didn't let him. I fought. God, I fought. But in the end, I was 22 and I wasn't brave enough. I told myself I was sacrificing one future to save many others. I ended things with Catherine, and it shattered me. I left her standing in the snow outside her apartment, ring in my pocket, heart in pieces. I've regretted that night every single day. Lila's throat tightened. She tried to imagine her mother, young in love, full of plans, abandoned in the cold without explanation. And then, 2 weeks later, discovering she was pregnant. She never told you, Lila whispered, the pieces falling into place. Alexander's eyes widened. What? Lila's voice was barely audible. She found out she was pregnant after you left. She told me she tried to call you, but your number was disconnected. Alexander paled, shaking his head slowly. That's not possible. I kept the same number for years. She said she went to your family's house. He sat back, visibly shaken. I was in London that semester for a business internship. My father told me she hadn't reached out, that she'd moved on. He even said he'd run into her on campus with another guy. She told me she sent you a letter, Lila said, heart pounding, with a photo of me after he was born. It came back marked return to sender. Alexander's jaw clenched. His voice dropped to a growl. He must have intercepted it. He didn't just want her gone, he wanted her erased. Lila's breath caught. He lied to both of you. I trusted him, Alexander whispered, more to himself than to her. I let him steer my life thinking I was protecting her, protecting the company. All the while she was alone. Lila's chest ached with emotion. She worked 3 jobs. She never dated anyone seriously. Said she didn't have time for love. But she kept that photo, the one you have, on her dresser for years. I asked once who it was, and she told me it was no one, that it was just an old memory. Tears welled in Alexander's eyes. She must have hated me. No, Lila said softly. She was angry, yes, but I don't think she ever stopped loving you. She just stopped believing in second chances. Alexander stood up suddenly, pacing the room like a man who didn't know how to carry his own limbs. All these years, I thought she'd moved on. I tried to find her once, 10 years ago. My marriage had ended. I had just lost my mother. I wanted to see her again, just to know if she was happy. You were married? Lila asked, a strange twinge of jealousy rising unexpectedly. Twice, Alexander said, almost guiltily. Neither lasted. I kept searching for someone who could make me forget her. No one ever did. So I finally hired a private investigator. He came back saying she didn't want contact, that she was remarried, that she wanted to be left alone. Lila's eyes widened. That wasn't true. I know that now, he said, his voice hollow. I should have questioned it, but I didn't. I thought I was respecting her wishes. So I did the only thing I could. I built my company's headquarters in this town, just to be near her, to pass the same streets, visit the same places. I never saw her, never reached out, but I was here, always one step behind. Lila's hands shook as she reached for the business card. She's in the hospital now. The treatment isn't working. We're drowning in debt. I can't lose her. You won't, Alexander said firmly, walking back to her. I'm not letting her fight this alone. Lila looked up at him, tears brimming in her eyes. If you're really my father, why didn't you know? I should have. He whispered. I should have fought harder. I let my father convince me she didn't want me. I let my silence speak louder than my love. And I've lived every day with that failure. Outside, thunder rolled softly in the distance. Inside, the truth sat between them like a long-lost letter finally delivered. She's not just sick, Lila added, voice cracking. She's tired. I hear her cry at night when she thinks I'm asleep. I see how she winces when she moves, how she hides the nausea, and I feel so helpless. Alexander knelt in front of her then, something in him breaking wide open. You're not alone anymore. Neither of you are. I can't erase the past, Lila, But I can fight for the future. Let me do that. She nodded slowly, the weight of her mother's silence suddenly clearer. Catherine hadn't hidden Alexander's existence out of cruelty. She'd done it out of heartbreak, out of protection, out of the belief that the man she had once loved had chosen something, someone else. But he hadn't. He had been cut off, lied to, robbed of the chance to be a father. And now, standing in this quiet room behind the bustle of the cafe, 17 years of silence had come undone. The truth had been buried, suffocated under a mountain of deception and fear. But now it breathed again, fragile but real. And as Lila stood and placed the photo gently on the table between them, her eyes met Alexander's. "I think," she said slowly, "you should come to the hospital." The fluorescent lights of the hospital hallway hummed softly as Lila Mitchell stood just outside her mother's room, her hands gripping the worn business card like it was a lifeline. Alexander Blackwood. The name still echoed in her chest like a drumbeat, steady and overwhelming. Hours had passed since that conversation at the cafe, a conversation that had peeled open a part of her history she never even knew was missing. Now her feet felt rooted to the sterile linoleum floor as her heart wrestled between loyalty to the woman who had raised her through fire and the fragile hope that the man who might be her father truly wanted to help. She looked through the small glass panel in the door. Her mother was lying there, Petomeo, exhausted, brave, always brave. Catherine Mitchell had never let Lila see her fear, but now, with the treatments failing and time slipping through their fingers like sand, there was no hiding the truth anymore. She was running out of strength, and Lila was running out of options. Her fingers brushed against her phone in her pocket. She had promised Alexander she would tell her mother, that she'd explain everything. But how could she? How could she walk into that room and shatter her mother's carefully built world? For 16 years, it had been just the two of them, weathering storms together, clinging to laughter in between the pain. And now a man Lila barely knew was offering to take some of that pain away. But at what cost? Taking a deep breath, she stepped inside. Catherine turned her head slowly, managing a smile despite the dark circles under her eyes and the IV line taped to her arm. "Hey, sweetheart," she said, her voice hoarse but warm. "You're early." Lila set a bouquet of daisies on the windowsill and sank into the chair beside the bed. "I needed to see you. Something happened." A flicker of concern crossed Catherine's features. "What is it? Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Lila replied, her voice trembling slightly. "But something happened at the cafe this morning. Someone came in, someone unexpected." Catherine blinked. "Who?" "Alexander Blackwood." The name fell like a stone in the room. At first, her mother didn't react. Then slowly the color drained from her face. Her hand, already frail, began to tremble. "Alex," she whispered, almost to herself. "He's here?" Lila nodded, unsure how to soften the truth that followed. "He had your picture, Mom. A photo of you from college. In his wallet. He said he's kept it for 17 years. Catherine turned away, her eyes flooding with unshed tears. "No," she said softly. "No, no, no." "He didn't know," Lila said quickly. "He didn't know about me. He thought you moved on, that you never wanted to see him again. He said his father told him lies, that you'd rejected him, and when you tried to reach out, your letters were intercepted." Catherine closed her eyes, the pain behind them almost too much to witness. "I believed his father," she whispered. "I believed him when he said Alex was engaged to someone else, that he'd moved on. I was 20, scared, alone. I tried again, I really did. But nothing ever came back, so I stopped. I told myself it didn't matter, that I didn't need him." Her voice cracked, and Lila reached out to squeeze her hand. "He wants to help, Mom. He offered to transfer you to the Mayfield Clinic. He said they have better specialists. He even called the director." "I don't want his charity," Catherine said, her voice suddenly sharp. "I don't want to be some guilt-ridden project he checks off his to-do list." "It's not guilt," Lila said, tears stinging her eyes. "Mom, he broke down in front of me. He didn't just walk away back then. He was pushed, manipulated, and he's been carrying that photo of you for nearly 2 decades. That means something." Catherine looked away, her jaw clenched. "I can't just let him walk back into our lives. Not now, not when everything's so fragile." "You're not alone anymore," Lila said. You've been carrying this weight for too long. Let him help, please. Not for you, for me. A long silence fell between them. The only sound was the steady beep of the monitor and the soft hiss of the oxygen line. Outside the window, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. Catherine's eyes, still glassy with emotion, turned to her daughter. Are you angry with me? She asked, almost inaudibly. Lila hesitated. I was, for a second. But now, I'm just scared I don't want to lose you. And if there's someone out there who cares about you, about us, and can do something about it, then maybe it's time to let him in. Catherine sighed deeply. He doesn't deserve it. Maybe not, Lila said, but you do. At that, Catherine's wall cracked. A tear slipped down her cheek, followed by another. She reached out and pulled Lila into a gentle embrace, her fingers weak but still full of love. Okay, she whispered. Tell him I'm willing to talk. Alexander arrived that evening, stepping quietly into the hospital room like a man walking through a chapel. He didn't bring flowers. He didn't bring gifts. Just himself, and a look in his eyes that held 17 years of words he never got to say. He stood at the foot of Catherine's bed for a long moment before speaking. You look strong, and he said softly. Catherine gave a faint, sad smile. Liar. He chuckled once. Okay, you look tired, but still beautiful. Lila stepped aside, watching the two people who had shaped her life from opposite sides of silence finally face each other. I'll give you two a minute, she said gently, stepping into the hallway. She stood by the door, her hands shaking, her heart beating like a thunderclap in her chest. This was it, the moment where past and present collided. And whether it ended in peace or pain, it had to happen. Inside, Catherine looked at Alexander, her eyes sharp despite her weakened body. Why now? He swallowed. Because I didn't know. I swear to you, Catherine, I never knew you were pregnant. I would have moved mountains to find you if I had, but I believed my father. He lied. And I was too young, too scared, too stupid to see it. And then what? She asked. You married other women. You built your empire. You forgot. I never forgot, he said, his voice breaking. I couldn't. I searched for you once, 10 years ago. I sent a private investigator. He said you wanted no contact, that you were married. I thought I had lost any right. Catherine looked away. So what now? You swoop in and save the day? Save me? I'm not here to play hero, he said. I'm here because I should have been, and because I want to be. Not to make up for the past. I know I can't, but to be present, to help you heal, and to know my daughter. She turned back, tears falling freely now. She's everything. I can see that, he said. She's strong, smart, brave, all you. Catherine nodded slowly. She deserves better than this. She deserves everything, and Alexander said, stepping closer. And I want to help her have it. Please, Catherine, let me. Catherine reached for a tissue, wiping her eyes. You hurt me, she said. Not just then, for years. Every birthday, every time she asked who her father was and I had to lie. I hated you. I hated myself. I buried it so deep I thought it couldn't touch me anymore. But it still hurts. I know, Alexander whispered. But I want to help carry it now if you'll let me. She looked up at him, searching his face for the truth. If this is about guilt, it's about love, he said. Still, after all this time, Lila returned to the room an hour later to find her mother and Alexander sitting side by side, a quiet understanding settling between them like a fragile bridge. Alexander looked up at her and smiled gently. Your mother's agreed to the transfer. You'll leave for Mayfield in the morning. Lila's eyes welled with tears. Thank you. No, he said, walking over to her. Thank you, Lila, for being strong enough to hold on to both of us, for giving me this chance. As he handed her the finalized paperwork and turned to leave, Lila followed him into the hall. One more thing, she said. Yes? She's still scared. So am I. She still loves you. So do I. And just before he walked away, she asked, what about me? Where do I fit in this reunion? Alexander's eyes filled again. You're the reason it's happening. You're the beginning of something I never thought I'd have again. I want to be part of your life, not just today. Always, if you'll let me. Lila nodded slowly. We'll see, one step at a time. Dear listener, if you felt the weight of Lila's journey, the strength it took for her to stand between love and pain, hope and history, I invite you to leave a comment below. Let her know she's not alone in that hallway, carrying her mother's future and her own tangled heart. Click like if you believe second chances are real, and share your thoughts if you've ever found love or forgiveness in unexpected places. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing we can do is remind someone that their story matters. This isn't the end of Lila's journey. It's only the beginning. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and wilted flowers, and the rhythmic beeping of machines had become so familiar that Lila Mitchell barely noticed it anymore. She sat by her mother's bedside, her fingers curled around a plastic water cup, her eyes fixed on the woman who had given her everything, including the lie that had once protected her from heartbreak. Catherine Mitchell, pale beneath the hospital sheets, tried to hold her smile like she always did, but Lila could see the cracks forming. The fire in her mother's eyes, once steady and unwavering, now flickered with exhaustion. The new round of treatments hadn't helped. The doctors didn't say it outright, but Lila could feel it in the weight of their pauses, in the way they exchanged silent glances when reviewing test results. Hope was slipping through their fingers. And Lila, she was tired of pretending she didn't feel it too. Only a few days had passed since Alexander Blackwood, the man who, for 16 years, had been nothing but a phantom in their family story, had walked into the cafe and unknowingly into Lila's life. The man who might be her father. The man who still carried a photograph of Catherine in his wallet. A relic from a love that had been torn apart before she was ever born. Now he was offering something Lila had never imagined possible. A lifeline. The Mayfield Clinic. A name she had only heard whispered in waiting rooms, spoken of like some distant oasis of miracles reserved for the wealthy. Alexander had said he would take care of it. No strings attached, no expectations, just help. But for Lila, that offer came with its own kind of fear. Not of the clinic, not even of him, but of what it might mean to accept it, to admit they needed him, to believe that someone who had once disappeared could really come back and stay. She had told him she'd talk to her mother. That was 3 days ago. And each night since, she'd stood outside Catherine's hospital door with the business card in her pocket, wondering whether this was the moment she'd finally break open the years of silence. Today, though, there was no more time to wait. Dr. Mata had just left the room with new scans, and her face had said what her words didn't need to. The current treatment was failing. The cancer wasn't slowing. If anything, it was gaining ground. Lila placed the water cup down and took a breath that felt like it stretched across her whole life. "Mom," she said softly, "we need to talk." Catherine turned her head, her face already bracing for news. "Bad or worse?" "Something else," Lila replied. "I spoke to Alexander again." Her mother flinched at the name, not out of hate but out of fear. Fear of the past, fear of hope, fear of everything that man still represented. "What did he say?" "He wants to help," Lila whispered. "He offered to transfer you to the Mayfield Clinic. They have a new experimental program. It's targeted therapy, immunotherapy, I think. It's already saved lives from cases worse than yours." Catherine let out a breathless, bitter laugh. "And what does he want in return?" "Nothing," Lila said, emotion rising in her throat. "He just wants to help. That's it. He said he knows he can't make up for anything. He wants you to live." Silence fell between them. Catherine stared out the window where the first signs of spring were beginning to appear. Small, defiant bursts of green in the cold, gray world. "I don't want to owe him," she said at last. "You don't," Lila replied. "Not in any way that matters. But Mom, if you don't go, I might lose you. And I can't. I can't be strong through that. I don't know how." Catherine looked back at her daughter, her eyes full of sorrow. "Lila, I don't want to make you choose between loyalty and survival." "I'm not choosing him over you," Lila said, kneeling beside the bed, her hands clutching her mother's thin fingers. "I'm choosing us. I'm choosing another day, another chance. Please." And to the kind souls listening, those of you who've walked these halls, who've waited beside beds like these, who've begged for time you weren't sure you'd get. Maybe you know what Lila's heart felt in that moment. If you've ever looked into the eyes of someone you couldn't bear to lose and whispered, Please just stay. Then let her know she's not alone. Leave a comment, just a few words of encouragement. Let her feel your strength, your prayers, your love. Because when you're 16 and the world feels too big, it means something to know that someone, anyone, is listening. Catherine closed her eyes, and for the first time in weeks, Lila saw her mother surrender. Not to the illness, but to the truth. Okay, she said softly. Call him. Lila pulled the card from her pocket with trembling fingers and stepped into the hallway, her hands shaking as she dialed the number. He answered on the first ring. Lila? He said, and there was urgency in his voice, like he had been waiting by the phone all this time. She said yes, Lila whispered. We need your help. I'm already on my way, he replied. I'll take care of everything. And he did. By nightfall, the arrangements were made. The Mayfield Clinic had a bed ready. A transport team would arrive in the morning. Paperwork had been expedited. Doctors were reviewing Catherine's case before she even arrived. In less than 24 hours, everything had changed. And yet, the real journey, the one of hearts and healing, was only just beginning. That evening, Alexander came to the hospital with none of his usual armor. No suits, no guards, no agenda. Just a quiet man who had missed 16 years of birthdays, school plays, scraped knees, and midnight fevers. He didn't bring roses or apologies, just presence. And that was more than enough. Catherine looked up when he entered, her eyes scanning him like she was searching for the boy she once loved beneath the man he had become. You really did it, she said quietly. I meant what I said, he replied. No strings, just the right thing. I don't know if I can forgive you, she said, not with anger, but with vulnerability. I don't ask you to, he said. I just want to be here, whatever you need, however you'll have me. Catherine nodded slowly, and Lila watched as a piece of her mother's long-guarded pain seemed to shift. Just a little, enough for air to get in. Later that night, Lila sat in the corner of the room while Alexander and Catherine spoke softly. She listened to their laughter, tentative, still aching, but real, and realized she was hearing something sacred, the sound of wounds beginning to heal. Her heart swelled and broke at once, because while she was still scared of loss, of false hope, of all the things that could go wrong, she was also, for the first time, just a little bit hopeful. She pulled out her journal that night and wrote, "He came back. He didn't have to, but he did. Maybe that means something." Maybe not everything broken stays that way forever. And friend, if you're still with me, if you've followed Lila this far, would you pause for just a moment and share a few words in the comments? Something kind, something simple. She's still standing between what was and what could be. And sometimes knowing someone's out there rooting for you is enough to take the next step. The next morning, as the medical transport arrived, Alexander stood beside Lila, helping guide the gurney through the hallway. Catherine was groggy but stable, her hand clutching Lila's all the while. There was a quiet reverence in every step, as though they were carrying not just a body, but a prayer. And when they reached the van, Lila turned to Alexander. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. For what? He asked. For not leaving. He nodded, eyes shining. I missed the beginning of your life. I don't want to miss the rest. The ride to Mayfield was quiet except for the gentle sound of wheels humming over asphalt and the soft breathing of Catherine sleeping beside them. Lila leaned her head against the window, staring at the trees blurring past. And in that moment, she allowed herself one beautiful, terrifying thought. Maybe we get to keep her. The Mayfield Clinic was a world away from the faded, overburdened hospital room where Catherine Mitchell had spent the last 2 years fighting for her life. Here, the walls were bright, the windows wide, the air fragrant with fresh flowers instead of antiseptic. Everything was polished and modern, but it wasn't the glossy tile floors or advanced equipment that made it feel different. It was the hope. For the first time in years, Catherine wasn't fighting alone, and that changed everything. In the days that followed her transfer, something in the rhythm of life shifted for Catherine and for her daughter Lila. And hovering just outside that fragile new normal was Alexander Blackwood, a man with deep regrets and deeper intentions, who kept his word without fail. He didn't barge into their space. He didn't expect forgiveness. Instead, he arrived every morning just after sunrise, quietly taking a seat in the corner of the room, a coffee in one hand and a book in the other, always waiting for Catherine to open the conversation. Some days she didn't speak more than a sentence. Others, she would ask about his day, his company, the world he had built in her absence. And little by little, like a thaw after a long winter, the wall between them began to melt. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't sudden, but it was real. Alexander's consistency, his unwavering presence, spoke louder than any apology. He had missed 16 years, yes. He had been lied to, yes, but none of that gave him back the moments lost. The birthdays, the lullabies, the scraped knees, the parent-teacher conferences, the late-night fevers. He had not earned their trust yet, and he knew it. So he didn't demand it. He just showed up. And that, dear listener, is something worth remembering. Sometimes the most powerful thing a person can say is not in words, but in the willingness to stay, to return, to sit in silence beside someone whose pain you've caused, and say, without speaking, I am still here. There were moments when Catherine would look at him and see the boy she'd loved, the one who made her laugh in the library, who walked her home in the snow, who kissed her forehead and swore he'd never let go. But there were also moments when she saw the man who had let go, even if he'd done it with a gun to his back. Reconciling the two would take time. Love might have once lived in their hearts, but trust had to be built brick by brick. Lila, too, watched Alexander with the wary eyes of a girl who had grown up learning not to expect much from anyone but herself. She had seen men come and go in her friends' lives, fathers who made promises and broke them like glass. And she had grown up knowing her own father was not in the picture, as her mother had always put it, a phrase that now felt painfully inadequate. She didn't know what to call him now, not dad, not yet. But with every gentle word he spoke, every effort to learn who she was, Lila found herself softening. One day, she came into the room to find Alexander sitting by Catherine's bed, telling her a story about a failed business pitch in Tokyo that involved a power outage, a translator who had the flu, and a pitch deck that accidentally included his grocery list. Catherine's laughter filled the room, genuine and light, and Lila stopped in the doorway, stunned by the sound of it. She hadn't heard her mother laugh like that in months, maybe years. It startled her so deeply that tears welled in her eyes before she even knew why. Alexander looked up and saw her. Lila, he said warmly, I was just telling your mom how I once tried to convince a room full of Japanese investors that garlic and dishwasher soap were essential components of our company's growth strategy. Catherine wiped her eyes, still chuckling. And they applauded. Can you believe that? They were just being polite, Alexander said. Or maybe they really respected my commitment to kitchen hygiene. Lila smiled in spite of herself and stepped into the room. And just like that, in the simplest, quietest way, she felt the ice inside her begin to crack. In the following weeks, Alexander became part of their lives, not as an intruder but as a steady presence. He brought Lila takeout from her favorite Thai place. He stayed up one evening helping her prepare for a calculus exam, and though she refused to admit it out loud, he made the numbers make sense in a way they never had before. He even sat through an entire 3-hour school play to watch her brief moment on stage as a silent villager in the background, and afterward told her, without a hint of sarcasm, that she had stolen the show. At the clinic, Catherine's condition began to improve. The immunotherapy was working. Slowly, yes. Cautiously, but undeniably. Her white blood cell counts were rising. The tumors were shrinking. The pain was lessening. And with every new piece of good news, the mood in the room changed. They began to talk more about the future, about what came after the hospital, and what that future might look like, together. Still, there were difficult moments. There were days when Catherine would wake up crying, remembering the day she stood alone outside Alexander's apartment with a positive pregnancy test in her coat pocket and no one to tell. There were moments when she would stare out the window and wonder what her life would have looked like if she had fought harder, if she had not let grief turn into silence. And Lila had her doubts too. There were nights she lay awake wondering if this was just another chapter in a story that would eventually end in disappointment. She was afraid to want too much, afraid to believe that a man like Alexander, powerful, poised, always in control, would choose them over his world of marble floors and boardroom deals. Would he still be here 6 months from now? A year? One night while Catherine was sleeping, Lila and Alexander sat in the small courtyard behind the clinic. The moonlight spilled across the flagstone path, and the sound of the nearby fountain offered a gentle rhythm. I want to ask you something, Lila said, her voice quiet. Anything, he replied. Why now, she asked. Why keep coming back? Why not just pay for the clinic and leave? He looked at her, really looked at her. Because I miss too much already. Because every moment I spend with your mother reminds me of everything I lost. And every moment I spend with you reminds me of what I still have a chance to find. Lila blinked quickly, swallowing the lump in her throat. You can't just make up for it all. I know, he said. I don't want to. I just want to be present now. And maybe one day you'll let me be more than just someone who shows up. She looked away, tears slipping silently down her cheek. I want to believe you. I'll give you every reason to, he whispered. To everyone listening, if you've ever forgiven someone after years of silence, if you've ever opened a door you swore you'd keep locked forever, then you know how brave Catherine and Lila are. This isn't a fairy tale, this is real. This is human. So if you're here, if your heart is pounding like mine is now, leave a comment. Tell Lila you're proud of her. Tell Catherine she's strong. Let Alexander know that sometimes it's not too late to come home. Because your words, they matter. Your voice might be the one they need to hear most right now. Weeks turned into months. Catherine's health improved steadily. Her hair began to grow back. The circles under her eyes faded. And one morning she surprised both Alexander and Lila by walking across the garden without a cane, the sun catching in her eyes as she smiled, truly smiled, for the first time in years. That afternoon, Alexander found Lila sitting by the window, sketching. Your mother's walking again, he said, his voice thick with awe. I can't believe it. She's a fighter, Lila replied. She always has been. You are too, he said. She looked up. I get it from her. He sat beside her, watching the breeze move through the trees. Lila, he said quietly, I want you to know that whether or not you ever call me Dad, I'm proud of you, and I love you. She didn't answer right away, but she reached out and took his hand. And sometimes that's more than enough. The sun filtered gently through the wide hospital windows of the Mayfield Clinic's rooftop garden, casting soft golden light over the scene below, like a quiet blessing. Catherine Mitchell, wrapped in a pale blue shawl, sat in a wheelchair facing the breeze, her eyes half closed, a faint smile playing on her lips. Her skin was no longer gray with fatigue, and her hands, once trembling from weakness, now rested calmly in her lap. She had completed her final round of immunotherapy just a week ago. The doctors still spoke in cautious terms, using words like remission and responding well. But to Lila, none of that mattered half as much as watching her mother breathe easily again. Laugh again, live again. Every single moment felt like a miracle that she was afraid to speak too loudly of, in case it slipped away. Alexander stood nearby, a quiet presence as always, watching both Catherine and Lila with eyes that held the weight of all he had missed, and the quiet, unshakable gratitude for what he had been given in return. There were still scars between them, yes, still echoes of unanswered questions and the aching space left by years apart. But healing had begun. Not in grand, sweeping moments, but in the small things. In shared coffee during morning rounds, in soft laughter over old memories, in the way Catherine had stopped flinching when he touched her hand. And now, more than anything, there was trust, fragile but growing, like the crocuses beginning to bloom along the edges of the clinic path. Lila watched them both with something between wonder and disbelief. Just 3 months ago, she had been serving coffee, praying for one more month with her mother, not knowing her father's name, much less his face. Now she stood beside two people who had loved each other once, and maybe still did. Both of them weathered by time but softened by it too. There was something gentle in the way they looked at each other now. A tenderness born not of the naive passion of youth, but the hard-earned respect of two people who had survived more than their share of heartbreak and still somehow found their way back. That afternoon, as the sun began to sink behind the treetops, Alexander wheeled Catherine back inside and helped her into her bed. He moved with practiced care now, not like a visitor, not even like a guest, but like someone who belonged, someone who had learned to listen, to wait, to love without demanding anything in return. And it was that night after dinner, after Lila had left for a study session downstairs and the nurses had made their last rounds, that he reached for the small velvet box in his pocket. Catherine was sitting up in bed, her hair slowly growing back in soft wisps, her eyes calm and tired in the way only someone who had stared down death could be. When Alexander knelt beside her and held out the box, she blinked in confusion. "What's that?" she asked softly, her hand half lifted, hesitant. He took a breath and his voice trembled. "It's a question, a promise, a prayer." She opened the box with trembling fingers, and there it was, a ring. Not extravagant, not flashy, but simple and elegant, with a single sapphire nestled beside a modest diamond, a stone for wisdom, for depth, for all the blue of the days they had lost, and all the ones still to come. "I know it's sudden," he said, "and I don't expect an answer right away. But I need you to know I never stopped loving you, not once, not for a day. And I don't want to waste any more time. If you'll let me, I want to be here, not just for Lila, but for you. I want to marry you." Catherine's lips parted, but no sound came. She looked at him, at the man he had become, and then down at the ring. Not for what it was, but for what it meant. She had spent so many years carrying the weight of his absence like a stone in her chest, convinced that the chapter they had shared had ended in betrayal. But now she could see the full picture. She saw the broken pieces, yes, but also the hands that had gathered them carefully, one by one, and laid them before her without pride, asking nothing but the chance to try again. Tears slipped down her cheeks, silent and steady. "You were gone for so long," she whispered, "and I hated you for it." "I know," he said, "and I'll carry that." "I don't know if I can say yes," she continued, voice cracking, "but I think I want to try." He nodded, slipping the ring onto her finger. "That's all I ask." And just like that, the door to their shared past, the one she thought she had locked forever, opened again. Not wide, not without fear, but open. Lila found them the next morning, sitting side by side, Catherine's hand resting in Alexander's, the ring catching the sunlight like a quiet secret. "Did I miss something?" she asked with a smile. Her mother's eyes sparkled. "We're figuring things out." Lila didn't ask more. She didn't need to. Something in the air had changed. A gentleness, a sense of peace, like maybe, just maybe, they were going to be okay. That spring, Lila stood in the garden, watching her mother take her first unassisted steps across the flagstone path, her legs shaky but determined. Alexander hovered close by, arms at half extended in case she needed him, but holding back just enough to let her do it herself. And when she reached the bench and sat down with a breathless laugh, both he and Lila applauded like she had just won a marathon. "We're your biggest fans," Lila teased. "My two overprotective Blackwoods," Catherine replied with a grin. And in that moment, the name felt less like a shadow from the past and more like a banner for the future. Lila hadn't changed her last name. Not legally, not yet. But in her heart, something had shifted. She had started answering to it more easily, had even begun using it on school forms, because she was no longer just Catherine's daughter. She was Alexander's too. And slowly, cautiously, she was letting herself believe that being loved by both wasn't a betrayal to either. One evening, not long after Catherine had returned home from the clinic, Lila sat on the porch with her father, watching the sky turn dusky pink. She turned to him, her voice quiet. "Do you think things would have been different if you had known?" He didn't pretend not to understand. "Yes," he said honestly. "But I think they needed to happen this way for me to become the man who deserves to be in your life now." She nodded slowly. "I'm glad you're here." "I am too," he said. Then after a long pause, she added, "I don't call many people Dad." He turned to her, his face open. "But I think maybe I will." His eyes welled with tears. He reached for her hand, and they sat there in the quiet, no words needed. Because sometimes love is loud, but sometimes it whispers. And to you, dear listener, the ones who have walked this road with Lila, with Catherine, with Alexander, your presence matters. Your heart, your empathy, your belief in the power of second chances has been the wind beneath this family's journey. So if this story touched you, if you've ever watched someone find their way back to love, or if you've ever found healing in places you didn't expect, leave a comment. Tell Lila she's brave. Tell Catherine she's strong. Tell Alexander that showing up, even late, still counts. Your words are more than words. They are a reminder that stories like this, Real stories filled with loss and love and redemption still matter because this isn't just a story about a mother fighting to live. It's about a daughter learning to trust, a father learning to return, and a family choosing, against all odds, to begin again. The late spring air held the scent of blooming jasmine, and the sky above was brushed with soft watercolor strokes of pink and gold as the sun began to set over the rooftop garden of the Mayfield Clinic. The very same rooftop where, just months ago, Lila Mitchell had stood silently between her mother and the man she was only beginning to call Dad, unsure of what the next hour would bring, let alone the next season. But tonight the air felt different, lighter, steadier, full of a kind of peace that comes only after a long winter has broken and the first green shoots of new life begin to press through the soil. Catherine stood without assistance now, her body thinner than it once was, but stronger too, not just in form, but in spirit. She laughed easily, often, and with that same quiet grace that had carried her through years of hardship and silence. Her hand rested gently on Alexander's arm as they walked side by side, a slow, comfortable stroll around the garden paths, the kind you'd take not to get anywhere in particular, but simply to say, "We're still here. We made it." And just a few steps behind them walked Lila, her face lit by something soft and rare, ease. There had been a time when the weight of the world had rested entirely on Lila's shoulders, when she had counted dollar bills in a cafe storeroom to cover a single vial of medication, when she had studied late into the night, fighting sleep, fear, and helplessness just to feel like she was doing something. But now there was room to breathe. Shortly after Catherine's release from Mayfield, Alexander had placed a sealed envelope on the kitchen table in their small two-bedroom apartment, not with any fanfare but with quiet sincerity. Inside it was a document outlining a trust fund in Lila's name, enough to cover her education, her future, and perhaps most importantly, her rest. And alongside it, an offer letter, a summer internship at Blackwood Enterprises, the company she once only passed by on her way to school, its glass walls a world away from her own. "I don't want to hand you a life," Alexander had said that day. "I want to give you tools so you can build the life you want and never feel like you're alone again." Lila had cried, not because of the money or the opportunity, but because for the first time someone had looked at her not with pity, but with belief. And that belief, it changed everything. She had started the internship just a few weeks ago, walking through those towering office doors with her chin held high, her mother's courage in her bones, and her father's determination quietly blooming in her chest. She worked hard, listened more, asked questions. She wasn't interested in being anyone's charity case. She was there to learn, to grow, to earn her place. And in the evenings, she came home to a family that felt like a new kind of beautiful. There were still hard days, of course. Healing wasn't linear. Trust took time. But every time she heard her mother humming softly in the kitchen, or her father asking how her day went with genuine interest in his voice, Lila felt something inside her knit back together, something she hadn't even known was broken. And dear listener, maybe this is the part of the story where you wonder, how does a family come back from so much silence, from so much pain? And the truth is, they don't come back. They move forward, together. One conversation, one quiet moment, one act of love at a time. There was no grand finale, no camera-ready climax, just three people, all battered by life in different ways, choosing to show up, again and again and again. Tonight, as the sun finally dipped below the trees and the sky gave way to evening stars, Lila stood at the edge of the rooftop, hands in her pockets, heart full. She looked out over the same city where she once felt small and forgotten, and smiled. Because she wasn't forgotten. She was found. Found in a photograph dropped on a cafe floor. Found in a conversation that shook the past awake. Found in a name she'd once been too afraid to speak. Blackwood. And now, it wasn't just a name, it was a part of her. Alexander joined her, standing silently beside her as the last light faded. "You're quiet tonight," he said. "Just thinking," she replied. "About?" She hesitated, then said softly, "About how everything changed, all because of one photo, one accident." He nodded, understanding. "Funny, isn't it? How the smallest things can unlock everything we didn't even know we were waiting for. Lila turned to look at him, her expression open and clear. I'm glad you dropped it. He smiled. So am I. They stood like that for a while, two silhouettes in the dusk, bonded not by perfection or promises, but by presence. Inside, Catherine was setting out mugs for tea. She'd insisted on brewing it herself. That was her way, quietly reclaiming her life, one gesture at a time. She looked out through the window and saw them, standing there, and her heart swelled with something she hadn't felt in years, wholeness. Because for all they had lost, they had found their way back. And now, dear listener, as we bring this story to a close, I want to leave you with something gentle, something true, something earned. Life doesn't always go the way we plan. Sometimes we lose people. Sometimes we lose time. Sometimes we carry heartbreak for years, locked tight in the quiet places of our hearts where no one can see. But then, sometimes, life gives us a second chance. And if we're brave enough to take it, it can be even more beautiful than the first. So to those of you listening tonight, maybe you're like Catherine. Maybe you've carried grief longer than you should have. Maybe you've been holding up a world all by yourself. I see you. I honor you. Maybe you're like Lila, growing up too fast, feeling like you're always one step behind, trying to be strong when it would be so much easier to fall apart. Keep going. You are stronger than you think, and your story is far from over. And maybe, just maybe, you're like Alexander, regretful, wanting to make things right, unsure if it's too late. It's not. The door isn't closed. Show up, stay, love without pride, because sometimes that's all it takes. If this story touched your heart tonight, if it made you feel seen, or brought tears to your eyes, or reminded you of someone you've loved and lost, would you do something small but meaningful? Leave a comment below. Let Lila know she's not alone. Tell Catherine you're proud of her strength. Tell Alexander that second chances are real. And if you haven't yet, please take a moment to like this video. It helps more than you know. And subscribe to the channel if you'd like to hear more stories like this one. Stories that remind us of what it means to be human, what it means to love, what it means to hold on, even when the world tries to pull us apart. Because here in this little corner of the internet, we believe in healing, we believe in hope, and we believe that some families, no matter how scattered by time and silence, are meant to find their way back to each other. In the end, Lila's story isn't just about her. It's about all of us who are still searching, still hoping, still believing that love can mend what the world tried to break. Thank you for listening, and until next time, hold your people close and never stop believing in the beauty of beginning again.